I want to describe a scene to you. Imagine a conference room with exactly 8 people at the table. One person is speaking, a very long, detailed presentation, clearly prepared and planned in advance. There are figures, slides, and all the arguments are solid. They finish speaking very clearly and concisely. Then they suddenly fall silent for a few seconds. After that, everyone starts looking toward the opposite corner of the table at the woman sitting there. To be precise, she hasn't said a single word yet. Yet everyone is incredibly curious about what she's thinking. Why is that? Because some people have a certain presence even before they speak, and that presence doesn't come from words. Actually, this video is all about that presence. It's not about how to speak louder, or how to take up more space, or how to draw more attention. On the contrary, it's about being the woman who leaves a bigger impression by doing less. From the way she enters the room to how she sits, even from her tone of voice to her composure, almost none of the things that make a difference are what you might think. If you'd like, let's start with our first point and take a look at the details of these interesting insights. 1. Make up your mind before you even enter the room. Many women walk into a room and then try to decide how they'll feel afterward. Believe me, that's exactly where the mistake begins. Controlling a situation isn't a skill. It's actually the result of a decision, and that decision must be made the moment before you step through the door. Of course, if someone has told you this by now, you're lucky, because many people either learn this much too late or never learn it at all. You must know exactly which role you'll play before stepping onto the stage. You can't decide that once you're on it. So on stage, you're left with no choice but to play the part. I met her years ago at a negotiation training session. Her name was Frena Taya, a middle-aged Italian woman. Her hair was always pulled back like that, and his voice was a bit hoarse, but he was truly a vibrant man. When he entered the meeting room, no one stood up, yet everyone acknowledged him in some way, and it didn't take me long to notice this. One day I asked her about it, and she said, "Every time I approach the door, I always tell myself, I am here and I have a reason." The sentence was actually that simple, but its impact was quite significant. If we look at it from a different angle in psychology, this is called intention. That is, the state of the mind intentionally preparing itself before a behavior. Of course, research on this topic shows us that individuals who mentally visualize a specific role or identity can display body language, and especially tone of voice, in a much more consistent manner. In other words, the body actually follows what the brain is thinking. So do you ever do this, for example? When you're rushing to a meeting, someone calls you somewhere, or you enter an unexpected environment. What exactly is your mind doing? Are you looking for your bag, checking your phone, or thinking about what to say? In fact, all of these can leave you unprepared when you enter the room. And as you can imagine, someone who enters unprepared is soon forced to get swept up in the room's rhythm. In other words, they've become part of a scene set by someone else. Here's a practical exercise you can try. Stop 10 seconds before reaching the door, physically slow down a step and pull your entire body back. Then say something like this to yourself: "I am carrying the energy of this room," or "I am aware of what I want here." The important thing is for your mind to notice this transition. I'm saying this so that unconscious entries don't lead to unconscious losses. Here, the door is a boundary, and if you can't determine who you are as you cross that boundary, then the environment determines it for you. And the environment is generally not neutral toward you. It's already shaped, already a place with its own dynamics. You're entering it, it's not entering you. I think you understand the difference I'm talking about. It's not because you adapt to it, but because you carry it. This difference can change everything. By the way, unfortunately, only 1 out of every 6 people watching the video is subscribed. You can give me a huge boost by clicking the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to help change this. Let's pick up right where we left off. 2. Where you sit reveals everything clearly. For example, Let's say you walk into a room, you need to choose a seat, and without realizing it, you're actually choosing your role in that room. Of course, this might seem like a small detail, but believe me, it's not. Where you sit, how you sit, and even who you position yourself near, all of these are messages. They're silent, but they send a clear message to the outside world. And believe me, there are always people reading that message. So even if you don't pay attention, others will notice. Because the brain processes these signals as an automatic reflex, it doesn't actually need to make a conscious decision. Research on power dynamics clearly shows that individuals sitting at the head of the table or in the central line of sight receive 30% more speaking time in group discussions. And no one asked them, no one invited them, simply the place they sat mentally assigned them that role. Of course, once you hear that number, you can't say, "wherever I sit" anymore. Or at least you shouldn't. So generally speaking, where do you position yourself? For example, in the chair closest to the door, because it's easy to leave, but it's the least visible spot. Or on the side thinking, "I don't want to take up too much space." Or do you decide where to sit without even thinking about it, only after you've entered the room? Actually, these feelings I'm describing are exactly what you should avoid, because this mindset puts you in the background even before you've sat down. Also, I admit that the head of the table isn't always an option, but you should know this. A central position, meaning a spot at eye level and not having your back to the door, these are perfectly controllable factors. Of course, these three criteria can be clearly applied in every setting, at every table, and in every meeting room, and when they aren't applied, someone else ends up controlling that space. As you know, an empty space must be filled, and that's exactly what happens. The person who fills that space begins to act as if they own it. I'd like to share a different anecdote. I met her years ago at a corporate training session. Her name was Fatima. She was of North African descent, in her late 40s, always with her hair pulled back, wearing glasses, a quiet yet sharp woman. On the first day when she entered the training room, no one recognized her. She was just another participant. But she walked straight to the center of the table and sat in the chair directly across from the trainer. No one wanted to sit in that chair. It felt too exposed, too in the spotlight. Fatima didn't hesitate at all. During the first coffee break, the trainer addressed her by name. By the end of the second day, she was the one speaking up most often during group discussions. On the third day, when the participants disagreed on something, they naturally turned to her. There was no title involved. It was simply a choice of seat and the posture that came with it. I should also mention this. The way you sit isn't about slouching, that is, sprawled out, nor is it about curling up into yourself. You rest your arms comfortably on the table, plant your feet on the floor, and avoid crossing your legs. In other words, you sit as if the space were yours. Because unclaimed spaces, as I said, always fill up, and you can be the one to fill them. You don't need anyone's permission to do this. Studies on workplace environments in the US have observed that women's use of physical space in meetings is significantly more restricted compared to men's. They take up less space, move further to the side, and choose less central positions. This is an unconscious habit. No one told you to sit on the sidelines, but somehow you always found yourself there. This realization is uncomfortable, but discomfort is where change begins. 3. The tone of your voice has a far stronger impact than your words. First, let me say this. It's not what you say, but how you say it. You've probably heard this phrase before, but hearing it doesn't mean you've understood it. Picture this in your mind. You hear the same sentence from two different women. One speaks quickly, with a slightly high-pitched voice, and her tone rises at the end of sentences, as if seeking approval. The other speaks slowly, in a low tone, and her voice drops at the end of sentences, as if nothing else needs to be said after that. Which one do you believe? Which one do you stand behind? You already know the answer. Voice tone conveys confidence or betrays it. It can't do both at the same time. Here's the reality. A communication study conducted at UCLA reveals that only 7% of our impression of the person in front of us comes from words. The rest is voice tone and body language. So what you say is the smallest part of communication. Really let that sink in. Because when you first hear that number, you might think they're exaggerating. But when you look at your life, you'll realize that what you remember most about the people who've impacted you isn't what they said, but how they spoke. For example, I want to ask this. Does your voice rise at the end of your sentences when you speak? Does it feel like every sentence ends like a question? This is a habit called uptalk, and it puts you on the defensive without you even realizing it. No matter how true what you're saying is, that tone of voice keeps asking, "Are you sure?" And people pick up on this subconsciously. They're evaluating your tone, not your answer, and you might not even be aware of it. Of course, I once observed this during a corporate communication workshop. There was a woman in her 30s, Sophia, of Spanish descent, working in the finance sector, short in stature, always dressed in dark colors, with an intelligent gaze. But her voice was constantly holding her back. What she said was perfect. Her analyses were clear. Her suggestions were strong. But as her sentences ended, her voice would rise so sharply that the power behind her ideas would vanish. The trainer told her just one thing. Let your voice drop as you finish your sentence. Don't let it rise. In her next presentation, the room was transformed. The same woman, the same words, the same content, but a completely different impact. People took notes this time. This time, they nodded in agreement. The only thing that had changed was her tone of voice. Actually, your speaking speed is just as important. Speaking quickly often indicates nervousness, not intelligence. You have so much to say, you want to get it all out, I understand. But how much can the person across from you keep up with at that speed? What happens when you slow down? The person across from you waits. Someone who waits is listening to you. And the longer you make them wait, the more value it holds. This is one of the most fundamental dynamics of human psychology. You can't stand on fast-flowing water. You sit by the banks of a slow-flowing river. In addition to this, the depth and fullness of your voice. A high-pitched voice is often perceived as less authoritative in most settings. This is a biological bias, and it takes time to change. But lowering the pitch of your voice slightly, learning to speak from the diaphragm, that is, speaking from the chest, not the throat, this can be developed through practice. When you wake up in the morning, before straining your vocal cords, say a few sentences in a low voice. Let that voice guide you throughout the day. It sounds strange, but it works. Finally, starting today, try this. Observe only this for an entire day. Your own voice, its pitch, speed, and how you end sentences. Record it if you like. A phone is enough. Most women are surprised the first time they hear their own voice from the outside. Sometimes they even feel a little sad because the voice you hear inside isn't the same as the one that comes out, and the voice that comes out is the one that represents you. Getting to know it is the first step toward changing it. 4. The first 10 seconds are enough to set the tone. I want to start with this harsh reality. 10 seconds. You walk into a room, take a few steps, maybe make eye contact, and in that person's mind, you've already begun to take shape. Of course, I admit, this isn't fair, but it's the truth. As many of us might guess, the brain makes an assessment within milliseconds of seeing a new person. Threat or opportunity, important or ordinary. This assessment isn't conscious, it's a reflex. And what influences those reflexes aren't words, it's posture, speed, gaze, and energy. In other words, things you can fully control. Understanding this takes you out of a defensive mindset and turns you into a designer, the designer of your own impression. Looking at it from another angle, Researchers at Princeton University found that people take just 100 milliseconds to decide on trustworthiness and competence based on facial expressions. 1/10 of a second. Before you've even said a single word, the person across from you has already categorized you in their mind. Don't let this information scare you. Let it set you free instead, because you can shape those 100 milliseconds. For example, what are you doing in those 10 seconds? Are you checking your bag? Do you feel like you have to smile a little too much, a little too early, a little too much? Or, on the contrary, do you look tense, with your eyes fixated on something? All of these are signals, and those signals shape the next 10 minutes, sometimes even the next 10 years. It sounds like an exaggeration, I know, but think about it. Recall the moment you first met someone. How long did that first impression linger in your mind? How many times have you said, "At first it seemed like this, but actually..." That "but actually" phrase shows just how powerful those first 10 seconds are. I especially want to emphasize this. A first impression is a door. You walk through that door open or closed, and forcing it open later requires much more energy. Having to prove yourself over and over again to everyone is exhausting. You've experienced this before. You've felt like you had to put in extra effort just to be present in a room. You had to speak up, explain yourself, convince others. Much of that extra effort was spent trying to regain the ground lost in those first 10 seconds. You could have spent that energy elsewhere. On top of that, the matter of smiling. You don't have to smile every time you enter a room. A calm, composed, self-assured facial expression, sometimes that's far more powerful than a smile. Someone who smiles constantly can come across as seeking approval. A smile is a gift, and like any gift, its value comes from its rarity. A smile given at the right moment to the right person, that's what makes it unforgettable. The bottom line, this isn't a matter of talent. There's nothing innate here. Shaping your first 10 seconds is a matter of habit, and habits are rebuilt every day, at every door. Try it today as you walk through a door. Just one door. Notice your shoulders, your steps, your breath. A small experiment. You'll be surprised by the result. 5. Learn to pause. Silence doesn't mean weakness. For example, what do you feel when you're silent? Most women panic deep down. They want to fill the void. They want to say something, as if silence feels like a mistake, a deficiency, a weakness. Yet the opposite is true. And once you truly understand this, your way of speaking will change forever. Actually, a pause isn't a void, it's an expression. For example, you said something important, and right after, you added something else, then another thing, then yet another. What happened? The important thing you said got lost. You piled words on top of it and buried it. But if you had paused, just 2 or 3 seconds, that sentence would have hung in the air. The person across from you would have had to think about it. And anything that makes you think is something you won't forget. In fact, musicians know this very well. The silence between notes is just as important as the notes themselves. Sometimes it's even more important. Communication works the same way. The gaps between what you say carry the weight of what you say. The critical question here is, why is this so hard in real life? Because silence creates pressure. And the first reaction to pressure is usually to fill the void. Especially in a meeting, a negotiation, or a debate, silence suddenly starts to feel unbearably long. A voice inside you says, "I have to say something." That's exactly the moment to stop. Because that feeling, the one forcing you to speak, is actually what the other side is feeling too. And whoever speaks first gives up the ground. Now, let me also point out this. Neuroscience research shows that brief moments of silence during conversations lead to heightened focus in the listener. In other words, what you say after remaining silent is processed much more powerfully in the mind than what came before. You can, and should, use this strategically. Never forget that you don't have to answer a question immediately. Saying, "Let me think for a second," isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of control. You can pause in the middle of a sentence. You can take a breath before emphasizing a point. These may seem like small gestures, but they quietly shift the energy in the room in your favor. Ultimately, if you feel you have to fill the silence, ask yourself this: for whom are you filling it? To ease the other person's discomfort, to seek approval, or because there's actually something worth saying? When you answer this question honestly, you'll know far better when to speak and when to choose silence. And this distinction is what separates an ordinary speaker from an unforgettable one. 6. It starts the moment you walk into the room. Unfortunately, most people associate impact with speaking. Wrong. Impact begins long before you speak. Even before you've uttered a single word, the room may have already read you. The moment you step through the door, that moment is not a performance, it's a reality. And that reality is shaped by preparation or lack thereof. Both are evident. They're always evident. For example, have you noticed this? Some people walk into a room and the atmosphere changes. No one can explain why. They have charisma, they say. Their energy is different, they say. But these are abstract words. There are very concrete things behind them. The pace of their steps, the position of their head, where their eyes go, how they close the door. Yes, even the door. Here's another thing. Body language researchers have long documented that the way a person enters a room sends a status signal within the first few seconds. Those who move slowly and deliberately are perceived as high status. Those who move quickly and haphazardly are seen as the opposite. This perception is unconscious, but its effect is very real. So, how do you enter? Do you look at something while pushing the door open? Do you flash a smile as if apologizing the moment you step inside? Or does your entrance make you feel as though you're late, unprepared, or asking for permission? Asking these questions isn't meant to belittle you. Asking them is where change begins. A friend of mine came to mind. Her name was Claudine, of French descent, in her mid-40s, a woman who always wore beige or cream colors with a calm yet sharp gaze. I first met her at a business dinner. She was late, exactly 12 minutes. But her entrance into the room was so measured, so controlled, that no one thought, "She's late." Everyone thought, "She's here." She didn't apologize. She simply sat down, smiled slightly, and said, "Shall we begin?" In that moment, she was the center of the room, even though she was 12 minutes late. Of course, this isn't something you're born with. Claudine had learned this over the years, and she'd learned it because she'd noticed it. She'd noticed first how she appeared. In daily practice, slow your steps before entering the door. I mentioned this in point 4, but there's a different dimension to it here. It's not just about speed, but intention. Let your entrance have a purpose. Where will I sit? Who will I look at? What will I do first? Know these things not at the door, but before the door. Once you enter, just execute. In short, your entrance into the room creates the first tangible impression people have of you. Your resume, your title, your past, all of these are abstract, but your entrance is concrete. It's visible, felt, and recorded. That's why you should approach every entrance like the opening of a small scene. You prepare before stepping onto the stage, and you enter the room the same way. 7. You need to stop explaining yourself. Let me give an example. You said something. The person across from you didn't ask, but you started explaining why you thought that way, why you acted that way, why you made that decision. The sentence ended, but you didn't stop. You added more, then you added a little more, and without realizing it, you undermined what you'd said. An explanation is a defense, and defense is the language of weakness. Of course, naturally, this sounds harsh, I know, but it's true. A confident person doesn't explain because they don't need to. They make the decision, say it, and stop. If the other person wants to understand, they'll ask. If they don't ask, they've already understood or don't need to. In either case, your extra sentences aren't necessary. Picture this in your mind. The people you respect most, the ones who've influenced you the most, do they explain a lot? Do they go on and on explaining their decisions? Or do they stay silent after speaking? You already know the answer. The real question is, why do we explain? Because we want approval. Because we're afraid of being misunderstood. Because we don't want the other person to be left with a question mark. All of these are understandable, but they're all things that diminish you. Because beneath that explanation lies this message: accept me. And once you send that message, you've also given away the balance of the relationship. I witnessed this last year in a mentoring program. There were two women, both were being evaluated for the same position. One would give long explanations after every question. I thought this because of that. Actually, it could also be viewed this way. Of course, there might be other opinions. The other one, her name was Vera, an Eastern European woman with short hair who spoke little and had a steady gaze, simply answered, period, sometimes in a single sentence. Then she'd fall silent. The room turned to her. You can guess the outcome of the evaluation. There's also a scientific basis for this. In social psychology, there's a concept called the pratfall effect. But the opposite is also true. Unnecessary explanations lower a person's perceived competence. So the more you explain, the less competent you appear. Paradoxical, but true. The bottom line, silence is an answer. Sometimes it's the strongest answer. When asked, why did you do that? Saying, that's what I thought, and then remaining silent, that is an answer, a complete, perfect, powerful answer. You don't need to add anything to it. Every sentence you add weakens that answer's power. Once you truly feel this, you can never go back to the way things were. 8. Lead with questions, never with answers. Before diving into this crucial point, let me clarify this first. If you want to know who's leading a conversation, look at this. Who's asking the questions? The one who answers follows. The one who asks directs. It's that simple and that profound. In fact, most people associate being effective in a conversation with giving strong answers. Wrong. Strong answers keep you on the defensive because an answer keeps you within the framework someone else has already set. But the right question redraws the framework, and the person who draws the framework becomes the owner of the conversation. Now, here's another point. Research from the Harvard negotiation program reveals an interesting finding. In negotiations, the party asking questions doesn't just gather information, they also determine the flow and tone of the conversation. So asking questions isn't a passive action. On the contrary, it's one of the most active forms of intervention. To be honest, for example, in a meeting, a discussion, or a difficult conversation, what do you usually do? You answer questions about yourself. You explain yourself. You defend your position. And while you're doing that, the other person keeps asking questions. Did you notice? They're in control. You're just responding. Believe me, you don't need to do anything big to change this. A single question might be enough, but it has to be the right question. What do you think is a weak question. What's behind this decision is stronger. Where do you want to go from here? Takes the conversation to a completely different place. The difference isn't in the words, it's in the intent and the timing. So, questions also protect you. You gather information without having to say anything. You understand the other person's intent without revealing your own position. And when you speak with that information, you speak from a much stronger place. You're not speaking into the void. For example, before entering your next difficult conversation, prepare 2 or 3 questions. Real questions, ones that make the other person think and deepen the conversation. And wait for the right moment to ask those questions. Asking too early gives away your haste. A question asked at the right moment, however, can sometimes turn the entire conversation around. Answers reveal who you are. Questions make you a leader. 9. Your body keeps talking, even when you're silent. Let me give an example. You're not saying a word. You're sitting there, listening, maybe waiting. And right at that moment, your body is telling a story. Your shoulders, where your hands rest, the position of your legs, how you hold your chin. All of these are speaking, even if you don't let it. Of course, body language isn't just for show. It's a channel of communication, and most of the time, it's far more honest than the words coming out of your mouth. Think about this. Someone sitting across from you has their arms crossed tightly, their shoulders hunched inward, and their eyes are darting around. What do you feel? You think, this person doesn't want to be here, or they're hiding something. Absolutely. And you didn't need a single word to think that. The brain automatically reads body language. It's an evolutionary mechanism that can't be turned off. There's also this. Studies in neuroscience show that people process non-verbal cues much faster than verbal content. So the person across from you is reading your body before they even hear your words. Once you truly grasp this sequence, you'll completely rethink the importance you place on the body. That brings us to the question, which signals speak the loudest? Hands first. Where your hands are and how visible they are, this instantly reveals confidence or tension. In fact, someone who hides their hands gives the impression of hiding something. Someone who keeps their hands on the table, visible and calm, appears open and confident. A small difference, a big impact. Then there's head position. Holding your chin slightly up, not too much, just slightly, adds a sense of resolve to your posture. Tucking your chin in, on the other hand, sends a signal of shrinking back. And most of the time you're not even aware you're doing it. I also want to mention something that's rarely discussed, but very important: foot positioning. The feet are the least controlled part of the body, and therefore the most honest. Research shows that during a conversation, people unconsciously turn their feet toward the exit, or toward the person they're interested in. The person across from you can read this. You can read it too. I observed this years ago during a negotiation. There were 5 people around the table. One person was talking constantly. Strong arguments, clear numbers, an impressive presentation. But one thing caught my attention. Every time there was tension, his shoulders would rise slightly. I noticed because I was watching closely. The woman on the other side, her name was Simone, in her 50s, short, with grey hair, and not one to speak much, had noticed this. She told me later. Every time his shoulders tensed, I knew the pressure was working. And she proceeded accordingly. She won the conversation without saying a single extra word. If I were to offer a concrete suggestion here, sit in front of a mirror or a camera today. Pretend to speak, out loud or silently, it doesn't matter. And just watch your body. Where do you place your hands? Where are your shoulders? How is your head positioned? What you see might surprise you. When most women do this exercise, they see for the first time the signals they've been sending unconsciously for years. And seeing is the first step toward change. Your body is always speaking. The question is, what is it saying? 10. Non-reaction is almost a form of power. For example, someone annoyed you or didn't give you what you expected. And you, what did you do? Did your face change? Did your voice rise? Did you respond immediately? If so, you gave away your power in that moment. Unconsciously, but you truly did. A reaction reveals where control lies. Always. Of course, if you react instantly when someone upsets you, that person is controlling you. Think about it. The person who makes you angry, raises your voice, or puts you on the defensive is actually pushing your buttons, and they know those buttons exist, and they're using them, realizing this is uncomfortable. But this awareness is the very essence of change. In fact, Stoic philosophers said this thousands of years ago. It's not the things that upset you, but your thoughts about them. Marcus Aurelius wrote this in his journals, just for himself, not to publish. You can maintain a distance from everything coming from the outside. That distance is your freedom. Non-reactivity isn't weakness. On the contrary, it's a hard-won inner discipline. There's a truly critical distinction here. Detachment is not emotional numbness. You can feel everything inside: anger, disappointment, sadness. These are part of being human. The issue isn't about not feeling them, but about managing them. You decide what comes out. This decision doesn't happen instantly, but it can be cultivated. In addition, social psychology research shows that individuals who can control their emotional reactions create a much higher perception of authority within a group. In other words, the person who stays calm doesn't just appear cold, they're perceived as a leader. The room subconsciously registers this. This person doesn't crumble under pressure. And someone who doesn't crumble is trustworthy. I'd like to talk about a woman. Her name was Ingrid. She was of Scandinavian descent, nearing 60, tall, always dressed in dark blue or black, and a woman whose voice never raised. I observed her during a board meeting. The loudest man at the table objected to her loudly, with incorrect information and in a condescending tone. The room tensed. Everyone looked at Ingrid. Ingrid waited a second. Then, in a very calm, very soft voice, she said, "Let's take another look at the numbers." She said nothing else. The man fell silent. The meeting continued, but from that moment on, Ingrid's presence at the table had doubled in weight, without raising a single word. That's it. Exactly that. Never forget that. Sometimes the strongest response is to give no response at all. Some things don't deserve a response. Some provocations grow when met with a reaction. They wither when ignored. Choosing this isn't running away. It's the highest form of control. Ultimately, if you want to control the room, you must first control yourself. That's how it works. It doesn't work any other way. After these 10 points, I'd like to briefly add this. For example, when you walk into a meeting tomorrow morning, step into a room, or answer a question, your mind will revert to its old habits. Because habits are stronger than knowledge. Knowing isn't enough. You have to practice. Once, then once more, then once more. Small, persistent. A quiet transformation. Never forget this. The woman who commands the room isn't the one who speaks the loudest. She isn't the one who explains the most. She isn't the one who laughs the most, agrees the most, or fills the space the most. She is the woman who makes you feel something the moment she walks in. An indescribable yet palpable presence. This presence isn't innate, it's earned. It builds up and grows with every door, every silence, every "I don't need to explain" decision. You're already that woman. You just haven't adjusted your habits to match it yet. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, but the real thanks come when you share this content with someone else. If you subscribe, like, or stick around on the channel, these small things mean the world to me. And don't forget the hype button. Every time you click it, you directly help these videos reach more women. And what grows this channel isn't algorithms, it's viewers just like you.